We're good. Mic check. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome back to the Abu Dhabi International Book Fair. My name is Saeed, arts and culture reporter for the national newspaper based here in Abu Dhabi. We're here with a wonderful guest. We're here with Layla Abu Layla, a wonderful Sudanese author, born in Khartoum, now residing in Aberdeen, Scotland, whose work has been translated into 15 languages and is a winner of the Kane Prize for African Writing. She returns to the UAE to discuss her latest novel, River Spirit. And I'll give you just a little bit of a synopsis of the novel before we get into the conversation. Set against the backdrop of British imperialist history, it's a gripping story about an enslaved young woman's coming of age during the Mahdist War in 19th century Sudan. We follow the main character, Akuani, as she comes of age during this revolutionary atmosphere with its share of violence, humanity, big historical figures, and a country coming to terms with its history as it looks forward to forging its own path to the future. Layla Abu Layla, welcome back to Abu Dhabi.
So thank you very much for this introduction, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to the Abu Dhabi Book Fair and to the Emirates Literature Foundation for inviting me. You might not know this, but I came to the Emirates Literature Festival almost 15 years ago with my second novel, and so this is my sixth novel. So it's really nice that they've been supporting me all this time. So yeah, as you said, this is the River Spirit is set in the 19th century's Sudan.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very interesting work, and it's just been released a couple of months ago. So it's still fresh.
Yes.
It's super fresh.
It's fresh.
And you came here, and also you've been on the promotional trail.
Yes.
You've been doing book tours in Europe. You just came from Germany. How has the reaction been so far? I mean, from the readership that you've seen, because this is really one of your most ambitious novels to date.
Yeah, the reaction has been very good. There was a very nice review in the New York Times, and the reviews have been actually very good. I think now people are reading it differently now after what happened in Sudan. People who are picking up the book now are reading it with a different thing in mind than they did when the book came out in March. So maybe it's kind of echoing to them some of the things or giving them a bit of background to what is happening now. But a lot of people are saying that it is informative. I mean, it's giving them this information about Sudan.
I mean, and we will get into that because, I mean, the story is set in the Mahdist War of Sudan. And this is a period that perhaps is not well known, despite being a very important one when we were discussing colonial history generally, or the history of colonialism. Can you tell us a little bit about that period, and why did you choose to kind of focus on that with this latest work?
So in 19th century Sudan, Sudan was ruled by the Ottoman Empire. It was part of the Ottoman Empire, and they ruled Sudan kind of through Egypt, and they asked very heavy taxes on the Sudanese. It was a kind of the Sunnis felt exploited, and they felt bitter about it. And so when a man came along and claimed that he was the Messiah, the expected Mahdi, people rallied around him, and they wanted to rise against the Turks. And so this was a kind of a full-scale rebellion, which kind of grew and grew, and every time an army is sent out to defeat him, he defeats them, even though his followers have very little in terms of weapons and things like that. So this increased his prestige, and so this it built up until they reached the capital, Khartoum, where the British governor Charles Gordon was there, and they put Khartoum under siege. And then eventually they defeated Gordon, and they took over Khartoum, and Sudan became an independent country which kind of had self-rule for 14 years, and that was quite an achievement because in a kind of ocean of European and Ottoman imperialism, there was this country, this island of self-rule for 14 years.
Did you, it is a historical fiction, but were you trying to add anything new to our understanding of this subject with this novel?
Yeah, so I grew up reading about this history from a very, colonial European point of view, which centered the European characters. So you hear about the story, you read about it, and it's all about the character of the British, Governor Gordon, and the Sudanese are just like, troublemakers in the background. So I wanted to write the history in a way where the Sudanese we are hearing them, we're seeing the history through their eyes. And I also wanted to focus on women, because women are rarely mentioned in the historical accounts. They're either footnotes or they're just not mentioned at all. And yet, of course, they played a big part in all these campaigns. They used to travel with the army. They used to, set up stalls everywhere the army went. And so I wanted to kind of capture the life of the women and whether they're on that side of the conflict or this side of the conflict. I wanted to give them a voice.
Was the roots of the anxious times that led up to the Mahdi's arrival, was it rooted in a lot of economic or social disenfranchisement at that time?
Yes, economic in the sense that people were paying taxes that they couldn't even afford, and
so there was a cost of living crisis.
There was a cost of living crisis, yes. There was also, they were not ruling themselves. They were being ruled by foreigners. They felt that they were being ruled by foreigners. The foreigners in this sense meaning the Turks and the Egyptians, and then the British. So they didn't really enjoy self-rule, and so this is what they were rebelling against. And there was a feeling, you read in the records, there's a feeling of pride, that they don't want to be, that they don't want to be, they feel this oppression and they don't want it. They just don't want to be oppressed in that way.
Because as you're saying, there was a sense of economic disenfranchisement. There's a cost of living crisis. There's almost kind of a feeling that the rulers were almost ruling and viewing the Sudanese community or the natives as almost like deplorables. In the sense, I'm trying to see, like, did you see any parallels, between what's happening then to some of the polarizing political environment that we're seeing in the Western world now,
yeah.
like or the conflicts that we're seeing caused by this economic malaise?
Well, yeah, and when I was writing it, I could see echoes with the movements, the Islamic movements, Boko Haram, the ISIS, that it starts off with a sense of grievance. The people feel that they are oppressed, that they feel that they are hard done by, and that there is a lot of resentment against the ruler. And once someone comes and gives them a green light, says the ruler is an infidel, this is the turning point. That they say the ruler is an infidel, and so this gives them a kind of green light to attack the ruler and to rise against authority. And this is the dangerous part of it. And this is what happened in Sudan, where the Mahdi said that the Turks and the Egyptians, who are Muslims, he said to them, they are not Muslims. So once they have that in their mind, that they are, fighting against an infidel, it just makes it easy for them. So they were killing them, they were taking their women, they were saying their marriages weren't valid anymore, they were annulled, and it was crazy. Yeah.
And were these echoes between history and now? Was that some of the, because these things were picked up in the reviews?
Yes.
Of, especially like in New York Times and and the other press. And when you're meeting readers in Germany and Europe, were they also picking up on those things? Or like, did you hint it in a way that what's happening then, it echoes today?
Yeah, it's something that people were picking up, because history is interesting because it helps us understand the present. And so it helps us understand what is going on today when we have this historical background, or we see things repeating themselves. And and then that's and so you know you get this insight into these group of people who feel so disenfranchised, so marginalized, you know, so oppressed that they then rise against the authority. And of course, with this religious fervor and this conviction, it gives them, you know, the extra strength.
And just kind of, you know, before, I just want to focus one more question on the present before we kind of go back to the history of that you're dealing with. I mean, and I'm sure what you're seeing now in Sudan, you're seeing, you know, two strong characters, you know, in conflict, two charismatic characters, for better or worse. When you see what's happening in Sudan now, is it kind of also, and the book is written already, but do you kind of see what's happening now? You think, oh yes, I wrote about this. I see how we are in this position?
No, it's different because, of course, now, in a way, the people, especially the people of Khartoum, feel that they're caught in the middle of this struggle between these two generals, the army and the paramilitary. So there isn't. In the past, they were, you know, the tribes and the different people were behind both sides, so there was a clear situation of a civil war, which isn't here now. But what I saw parallels was the threat to Khartoum from a group of people coming from the west of the country. So the people of Khartoum feeling, you know, who are these people? We don't know them. They're not part of us. The cosmopolitan, you know, spirit of Khartoum is threatened. These people coming in, they don't understand the values of Khartoum, of being an open city, a city which includes, you know, different nationalities, different religion, a city which has, you know, churches. The way people left Sudan, going to Egypt, going to Port Sudan, the same thing happened at the time when the Mahdi took over Al-Ubayd. The people of Khartoum also began an evacuation, and they also went to Egypt, and they also went to the Red Sea, and then the Red Sea was blocked because some of that also fell into the Mahdi's hand. So it became then difficult to get out. So some of this feeling that came out in the past month of the city itself, of the capital, being under threat and having its cosmopolitan character, you know, be threatened in that way, that is what felt to me like an echo.
I mean, another subject. Just before we kind of go further with this, I want people to know that Layla Abu Layla will be signing copies of the book. Right over there in the corner, there's a stand. Books will be available for sale, and Layla will head there and sign your copy. I'll be mentioning this a couple of times during the session in case you forget. Now, moving on to the next one. Another subject that River Spirit brings up that I was not so familiar with is this the concept of the East Coast slavery experience. Because the main character, Akawani, she's black, she's a slave. And, you know, and that aspect of, you know, the slave channel from the East African one is something that's not being told a lot. Can you tell us a little bit about that you know, that experience, and what is the social and cultural context that surrounded that?
So when I was doing my research, I went to the University of Durham in the UK, which holds the Sudan archives, and I found a bill of sale for this woman, and it had her name, and it had the price, and it had the name of the men involved in the sale, and I found that shocking. I mean, I knew that slavery existed in Sudan, and I knew that almost, let's say, it's not an exaggeration, but every single family would have a branch that's descended from an enslaved, you know, woman. But to see it, but people don't really want to talk about it. So to see it like that in a written down was kind of like shocking for me. And I began to research the East Coast slavery, and it's very different than the West Coast slavery. We all grew up with the, you know, the plantation culture. We've seen the color purple. We have visions of, you know, the Atlantic slave trade and all that. Yeah, but we don't know much about the East Coast slavery. There isn't. Now there's more and more research coming up on that, and it's an interesting subject. And also, you know,
Was there anything distinctive in terms about, you know, the East Coast slavery experience?
Yeah, the distinctiveness was that it was not capitalist driven as much as the West Coast was. It was more that they wanted the young men for the armies, and they wanted the women for domestic work.
That's the West or that's the
That's
East?
the East.
That's the East.
That's the East,
Right.
yeah. So the West was very much that these people were to work, to labor in the plantation, and they considered them as machines, basically, to work. But in the East, it was not like that. It was more the armies and the domestic labor. Some, yes, of course, they did work in the fields. They did work in in farming and all that. But that was not really the main thing. Also, because the whole process was under Sharia law, there was the assimilation was quicker. So, the children born of this enslaved women were equal to their brothers and sisters from the free mother, for example. So these things, it quickened the process of assimilation. So there are differences, but of course the extent of it, the extent of how much they suffered, the numbers involved and all that, we really don't know much. The research isn't clear. And of course the assimilation was also quicker because of the race. It was not so racial as with the North America, and South America,
I mean, and the character Akwani, she comes of age and she grows up, within that social context, within that historical context. I mean, and you said that you wanted to read something about that
Yeah.
kind of gives us a little taste of what Akwani is as a character.
Yeah. So the novel really follows Akwani's love story with a merchant from Khartoum called Yassine. And so you could really, although we've been talking a lot about the history, but you could really read the novel as a love story, and you're following the characters as they go along, coming together and then being parted depending on the wars and depending what's happened. So at this part of the story, Akwani has been is in Khartoum, and she's enslaved by a Scottish painter who wants to paint her and become famous back in Scotland. So this is her take on the subject, yeah. As soon as she had arrived in Khartoum, the river, huge and strumming, claimed her. After years in the desert, she felt welcomed by the water, knowing it to be the timeless companion, the one that ran without effort, gave without needing, sang and sang the ancient tunes she had heard in her childhood, the songs she had yearned for and listened out for, that she had only half understood, but it did not matter because listening was more important. She could strive to understand at her own leisure. Tomorrow or the day after or the day after, the river would still be there for her, patient and strong, rich and always flowing in the same direction. In the Khawaja's paintings, the river was stiff. It didn't move, it didn't sing. Instead of smelling like a river, the paints had an odious smell. And yet he thought well of his art, acted as if it were the most important thing in the world, claimed that it was valuable, was curious about the color of her tongue, how it compared to other parts of her body. He disgusted her with his poking and examinations, his insistence on paralyzing her on canvas. In response, she would glare at his paintings, cursing them. Her curses, melodious and repetitive, unnerved him, and that filled her with satisfaction. Every morning, she went to the river, washed and dawdled, bent her head and listened.
Absolutely, absolutely. Remember, she's signing books right on the corner. It's a brilliant book because, as a journalist, I guess, the first thing that comes to me when I read this book, just from a professional perspective, was the amount of research that's been involved. And you hinted at this, University of Durham.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about that? It seems like it's like a lot of work that got into. I mean, what primary sources were you looking for? How did you even begin the research? Is it from a Google search? How does it start?
No, I spoke to experts on the historical, historians who were experts in the field.
So you wanted to so you already had an idea that you wanted to explore this subject when you began writing this book? I mean, did it begin from, I want to write the next novel about this period, or you were just researching anyway, and then the idea for the novel came?
Well, I grew up with this story, and if you do Sudan history in secondary school, and I did it a bit of it in university, so you know it. It's there, you know it. And I knew the locations. I mean, this is the palace. This is this. This is. I mean, I know it. You kind of grow up with it. But then when I came to write the novel, of course, I wanted proper research. And I wanted to be accurate. And I thought, I don't want to. The story is so thrilling. The truth is so thrilling. Why would I want to change it or anything? Let's just have it as it is. So I spoke to historians, and they said to me, this source is good, this source is biased, be careful of that source. Because some of the sources are biased because they were edited by the British. And the British, after were trying to justify, they were trying to build a case for invading the Sudan. And so they wrote about this period, and some of the books they edited about this period were very much sort of slanted into we need to save the Sudan sort of scenario. So I was very careful of that. I'm bilingual, so I can read Arabic. So I went back to the primary sources that were written in Arabic. I read people who were supporting the Mahdi. And I read the other side. So I was reading both sides of the conflict and trying to see, trying to get a balance, trying to capture the mood of the people at the time. And also the details are nice. Some of the what people ate, how they traveled. They traveled by camel. It's really nice because then you build up with all these details. You kind of build up a world. And so you can then have that in the book and in the novel, and it's just great.
Because you're building up that world,
Yeah.
do the characters just present itself? I mean, because at the end of the day, there is a love story. There's strong characters in there. They're fully formed. Like, did those characters come as a result of that research, or what came first? The story that you wanted to tell, the love story, and then you built that world around it, or did it begin with the research and the characters kind of made their way to you?
A bit of both. So the young woman, the Akwani, came from this bill of sale I saw. So she was the one there in the document. And then I wanted a character who was a soldier and supporting the Mahdi and fighting on the Mahdi's side. So he was the kind of the radical, young radical man. So that I got that. Then I wanted somebody who would be against the Mahdi, and I got interested in the scholars because the ulama of Khartoum were one of the first people to point out and say, no, this guy is not who he claims to be. And they stuck to this opinion, which was a religious opinion. And the fatwa they gave out is so eloquent, is so beautifully written. I was so touched by it. And yet it was so easy to say about them, to point the finger and say, oh, these people, they're supping at the Sultan's table, they're supporting the government, don't listen to them, it's just the voice of the government. Whereas they actually were doing their homework, and they were actually passing a valid point of view and saying that this man is not who he is, and history proved them right. So because he said this is the end of the world, and it was not the end of the world. So and then they were persecuted when Khartoum fell. They were they were killed, they were imprisoned, they suffered a great deal. So suddenly they seemed heroic to me, and so I wanted someone like that. So I had this character who meets Akwani because he's trading in the south, bringing the gum Arabic to the north, and then he changes his mind and says, I want to go to study in Al-Azhar University in Cairo, and he becomes a scholar, and so he becomes part of this group of the ulama. So that's how his character came through.
I mean, doing the research is one thing, and then the writing process is different. Was it difficult to pack in or to build that world while at the same time keep the narrative moving? Because the tempo it's a very active tempo.
Yeah.
It's poetic, but the narrative is quite strong. How tough was it to kind of bring in that information about that period while still maintaining the momentum of the novel?
Okay, so I'm very lucky. I have a brilliant editor, and when I sent her the first draft, she spotted what all people in my situation would make the mistake they make is that we over-research and we do what's called information dumps. So instead of, as you said, pick up the pace, we show off, oh, you know, I know so much about this and that and the other, and look at all that I know. Whereas the reader wants to follow the story. So she made me cut.
It's tough, though.
It's very tough.
It hurts. It hurts. It hurts my feelings when I'm edited like that.
Yeah.
Like, how tough was it? 'Cause
It's very tough. It's very tough. So I would go and I would cut, you know, 10,000 words, and you know, and that's a lot. And then, you know, she'll say, well, you know, do you think you can cut some more? And I'm like, what? But I go away, and then I come back and I cut some more. And so I cut a lot. So what you're seeing now is a result of these cuts. And I'm being honest here.
Yeah. But the thing I wonder, though, and this is also a great tip for the, you know, aspiring writers
Yes.
here. I mean, when you look back upon what, you know, what has been cut, how much, like, in terms of the fat of it, was it needed? Like, what was cut out? Was it all about information, dates and times, or what are some of the things that didn't make it?
Some of the things that didn't make it were like details that were completely irrelevant to the pace of the story. So there's a conversation between two people. So as I said to you, this Yasin is supporting the Turkish.
Right.
So his friend says to him, the Ottoman Empire is shrinking, you know. And so his friend says to him, this was in my first draft, Cyprus got lost to the British, Bulgaria got lost to this, and he names exactly what got lost out of the Ottoman Empire, which is not really relevant to our story, and it's also so much details in a conversation. So that kind of thing got cut, you know, the kind of details, the historical details that are unnecessary, that are, and when you're reading, when you are researching, you pick up a whole lot of information, which is fascinating in itself, but it's not really related to the story, which is the love story, and we want to keep the reader going and all that. So that is the stuff that got cut.
Absolutely. And, you know, and it seems like, just picking up from that, the writing, just looking at the notes that I had about the book, because it seems that with each book, you are kind of taking grander themes. So I remember, like with Lyrics Alley, it was more concerned, with your previous book, Lyrics Alley, it was more concerned with family history and the people from the 1950s, who some of them had living memory of that. In The Kindness of Enemies, you kind of went further. You know, you had some primary, perhaps they were not alive, but you had some primary written sources from them. While here, you're doing the full tilt with historical fiction. I mean, you are building that world. Now, this evolution of yours, from kind of going from family history to almost to a history of a country, does that reflect, you know, you feeling more confident as a writer? Because, you know, writing is a confidence game.
Yes.
I mean, you kind of feel, you know, after doing all these books, you are ready to kind of take, perhaps, which I think is your most ambitious work to date.
Yeah, because I do feel more confident, because after doing, you know, one novel, two novels, three novels, you think, well, yeah, I've done this. I can do this. You know, I can do it. I know what to do. When I first started writing, I wrote short stories because I wanted the quick reaction. I wanted to quickly give it to somebody and have them say, oh, it's great, it's great. But now I can hold out. You know, I can be patient, and I can, just be patient and wait, until I have a whole novel. So it's also, so as you said, it's about confidence. It's also, I have the time. You know, my children are older. I've got time to do the research, and I find that I enjoyed it. And so,
is it more enjoyable than the writing?
No, both were enjoyable. I think both were enjoyable. But it's such a privilege to follow what you're interested in. So I wasn't just reading dutifully. It wasn't just about the duty of reading this particular time.
Yeah, it didn't feel like homework.
No. It was like, I am interested in this. You know, oh, this is so interesting. And I would just follow what happened. I mean, this thing about slavery, I wasn't really thinking I'm going to write about that. But when I found it, and I thought, oh, this is really interesting. And so I went down that route. So things like that was good to follow. Yeah.
And just before I open up the questions to the audience, I'll ask, just talking about, writing about history, because I do kind of feel like over the last few years, there has been a lot of strong historical fiction coming out from Africa. And, I don't think it's by any coincidence that's by women. I mean, we're talking about Chimamanda Adichie from Nigeria, Somali British writer Nadifa Muhammad. I mean, there's some great work coming, from Africa, talking about the African experience, within a historical fiction form. Do you feel it's a long time coming? I mean, are we kind of on the cusp of the next wave of great literature coming from the continent?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's good stuff being coming out for some time. I think the historical is interesting because of the need to say the story from an African point of view. That it's so much that we've heard it before, very much from the European point of view, and now it's time to shift, the perspective. And it's interesting. It's fascinating to read about that. I mean, so far we've all been focusing on the European presence in Africa, and we're responding to that. We're still in a way having the dialogue with Europe. We're answering back. We are responding to Europe's presence in Africa. But I see in the future also we might have a fiction which is between African countries or between Africa and China. There's been trade. These kind of things are marginalized in history. And so it's really interesting to go into that and not to have a situation where Europe is always the center of the story, and there's other parts of the world which we have our own story.
And I wonder, in a sense, that also as well, what role does fiction can play in making us understand the real world? Because a book, I mean, this is for me, this is a great gateway book to understand that period in Sudan, as opposed to reading, an authoritative, non-fiction book about that period. So for me, I learned more from that, and I enjoyed it more, and it was more insightful for me. Does that prove, I guess, the power that historical fiction can play in making people understand about the other?
Yeah, definitely. There's no doubt about it. I mean, we are products of what we've consumed in terms of reading, in terms of media, and in terms of films. And so this thing of reading, it shows you a different perspective. You're suddenly in the shoes of someone else. You're in the shoes of somebody who isn't wearing shoes, to be honest. I mean, you're actually in another mindset, and that is very exciting. And fiction does that in a way that even watching a film wouldn't do. But fiction does that. It takes you into this other world, into this other time, this other space, and it's fascinating.
And just one more for just picking up on that. But there's also as well that sense of responsibility, because especially for you, because you grew up with that history. You had family members talking to you about. I mean, as a Sudanese author, I mean, was there that tension between being responsible of trying to tell this story or this period, in a way that's authentic, while at the same time expressing yourself creatively? I mean, how was that tension between those two?
I never feel this tension. I mean, I've had this question before, and people do, have these things. I don't feel that way. I'm quite. I see it. I see these images, and I feel that then I'm just, when I was writing this book, it was COVID. I was not traveling. It was just wonderful, and I used to feel as if the story was underwater, and all I had to do is just go in and find these characters and tell you about them, and it was really such a nice feeling. So I don't like writing which is self-conscious, and I can smell it from the beginning. So I never do that. I never look over my shoulder. I never think what's so-and-so going to think, what so-and-so is going to think. Never.
Well, they say if it reads like writing, then it's not writing. Yeah. And now, I mean, look, I'll open up. We should have a microphone. If not, the microphone is here. Does anybody have any questions for Leila Abu Leila before we continue our session? Hands up, anybody? All right, then we'll. Oh yes, okay, yeah. So the first one is always the most nerve-wracking. We appreciate you.
Hi. It's just picking up from what you said now of not looking behind your shoulder. I've read your book and I think it's fantastic. It drew me in. It was informative. It was exciting. You gave women a beautiful role, and for that I thank you. And it also drew attention as well to the art movement that's coming now, you know, where we've got to shift our gaze to whatever is being presented in terms of art. But picking up on what you said of not looking behind your shoulder, I wonder, do you worry sometimes after a book like this where you've tackled a subject that's in your homeland, that you get pigeonholed or you become the voice of an entire nation, an entire country, which might limit your writing later on? Or do you not feel that pressure as well? Thank you.
No. I don't feel this kind of pressure. I think people who worry about things like that just shouldn't write. You know, I mean, you have to really not care. You have to be really ruthless. Like, all you care is the story. And you don't care if somebody thinks this is them or somebody, you know, writers really deep inside, they are really very selfish. There's a kind of selfishness which we hide, of course, because we want to appear as nice people. But there is a kind of a hard, sort of driven side where you really can't be bothered about these things. These are trivial things in comparison to getting the story just right. Yeah.
What about this idea as well, just picking up from what you're saying,
Yeah.
because, you know, whenever there's a writer coming out from Africa, there's always an African writer, African novelist, you know, I mean, like, quote unquote. I mean, 'cause when you won the award for the Kane Prize for African writing, I mean, is that that mantle of being, you know, an African novelist as opposed to just being a great novelist or just a novelist? I mean, is that something that you think about? Is that that tag? You know, because we don't say, you know, a European novelist or a British novelist. They're just a novelist. But when it comes to African writers, you know, and I remember Adichie was quite concerned about that title, great writer from Africa. I mean, do you kind of feel there's almost like a extra that responsibility or that extra mantle that comes with that?
Am I in the same league as Adichie?
No, but I'm saying, but but this idea of being like a writer from Africa and the way that you've been presented and talked about.
No, I am African. I mean, it's maybe we should start saying European writer. Maybe we should start saying this is an American writer. It's just, yes, of course, when you don't mention, then it makes it sound like it's normal to be an American writer, but an African writer, you have to say that you're African.
Right.
Yeah, of course. But that's just to do with the way people are saying, the way people are talking about it. It's not to do with the actual work itself. I mean, some of these classics, the Tayyip Saleh, the Buchi Emecheta, they were published by the African Writers series. Now they're published by the Penguin Classics. It's the same book, it's the same text, but it's just the time has changed. The text hasn't changed. So it's all about the text. It's not about the labeling, because these labelings change over time. You know, sometimes people say this, sometimes people call it this, call it that, according to the fashion, according to the mood. There was a time when there was a thing called women writers. You know, you're a woman writer, but now there's so many women writers that it makes no sense to say so-and-so is a woman writer. But there was a time when, you know, there would be panels about women writers, there'll be this, but it's the text is the text. Yeah.
And now in terms of just, you know, a lot of the time, you know, we speak about what happens, you know, when writing the book. Now that the book is, you know, now that the book is gone, it's published, what's the life of a writer like? Is it about is it all about the promotion of the book? I mean, what do you plan to do now that this book is out? Is it about going to as many places as you can, or are you already thinking about the next project?
I'm not thinking about the next project because I'm focused on promoting the book and on traveling. I'm maybe doing some short stories, some articles, but it will be some time before I kind of settle down and get into the next novel. Yeah.
And throughout the whole time, has the writing process for you changed? I mean, each subject is different. I mean, it's more complex sometimes. I mean, and you write different. You know, you write articles, you write short stories, you write historical fiction. Like, is the writing process still the same? Is it about refinement, or like do you try to find a new a new way of approaching the craft? Because there'll be a lot, because there's a lot of aspiring writers here as well.
Okay. No, the writing is the same, but what has changed over the years is the involvement of the author in directly with the reader. So we've got now the social social media. We have the events, a lot of events, a lot of people contact me directly and they ask me things and I reply.
How do you feel about that? Do you, I mean, because the whole stereotypical thing of a writer is like, I'm in my room, I'm in my writing zone, don't talk to me. How is it now, like, having you being so accessible to your writers,
this
to your
is
readers?
what has changed. This is what has changed. So sometimes you think, well, I didn't sign up for this, but the world has changed. This is now what readers want. Readers want this interaction. So it's a different situation now. What I split is between the time when I'm writing. When I'm writing, I don't share what I'm writing about with the readers. So I could be working on something and promoting another book, or but there is definitely more of a change in that writers are more involved in and directly in contact with the readers. It didn't used to be like that.
Absolutely. Any last? We have a question over here. I will. Oh, sorry. Microphone's over here. I'll come to you after. I promise. Go ahead, ma'am.
Okay, assalamu alaikum. How are you? I want to know, when is your mini-series coming out for Minarets, and when is your movie coming out for Kindness of Enemies?
I don't know.
I mean, look, but has there been discussions? Because your books are in a way that even this one, it is quite image-based. Has there been any discussions about taking any of your books to the small screen or big screen?
No. I'm still open for suggestions.
Yes. Yeah, there we go.
There we go.
I'll go to you here.
Thank you so much. Hi, Leila.
Hi.
Wonderful to have you here. I was so excited coming here. We're friends over Facebook.
Okay.
A word to aspiring writers, since you mentioned that. I loved your last answer to the lady about you really write what you want, and there are things that you really don't care about, and you just. But for charting your path in the beginning, it's kind of a bit difficult with getting the right agent, or how is it going to be accepted. Basically, my question is for new writers, how to break through in terms of staying true to what they believe the story should be, and how it's being received, for example.
Yeah, because it's like, as you say, because it's different. It's the relationship between you and your agent, the relationship between you and your editor. I guess. How tough is it to kind of, is it like to maintain the artistic integrity, in term, or yeah, for new writers?
That confidence, that I really don't care. I'm gonna write what, you know what I mean?
Yeah. How can new writers maintain their confidence, or just kind of stick to it?
It's the confidence in the craft. You have to really be good at the writing. So then, when somebody then is discussing that, oh, we don't want to hear about this kind of people, or we don't want this kind of story, or that, they can't even say that, because the writing is so good that you're going to make them not able to say, we don't want a story about a housewife. It's too boring, because the writing is very good, and if the writing is very good, then no subject is boring. So you just have to work hard on making the writing good, and not worry so much about the subject matter, because the subject is very difficult to predict or control what readers want. Even publishers don't know; they're not sure. Things move so fast, and the world is strange, and weird things happen. So nobody really knows what people are going to be interested in. So they just, so you should just write what you want. If you are excited about your text, then the reader is going to be excited about your text. If you are just putting things down because you think this is what the reader wants to hear, the reader will pick this up. So you have to be really sincere and really passionate about what you want to write about. Yeah, I guess.
I have time for one final question. Yep. Does the young man want to have a question? We just go. I'll go to you, okay. Yeah, the young man with the young child with the red shirt, with the Marvel shirt. He had his hands up the whole time. He's not messing around.
How long did it take to, how long did it take to,
How long did it take to write the book?
yeah,
How long did it take to write the book? It took a year for the first draft, and then it took another year for subsequent drafts. Yes.
Yeah. So the patience is quite involved. It takes a lot of patience to see it through.
Definitely.
And just the last question to that gentleman there in the front row.
Thank you so much. Just to follow up on what you were saying about, like, you were talking about when you started writing, don't look at shoulder back, etc. But what is the advice that would you give to people who would like to start writing? What will you say to them, like how to start writing?
Okay, I'd say, read a lot. You have to really read a lot so that you're, because writing is an extension of reading. So the higher quality, if you have to read high quality books in order to produce high quality work. And also to follow your interests. So, write about what you're passionate about, what interests you. Don't think too much about the market. The thing with writing is that it's a leadership position. So you are the one who's leading the readers. It's not the other way around. You can't, you can't really give the readers what they want. You have to tell them, that you want this, you should read this. You should be so confident about what you want to write about, I guess. That's advice, yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, Layla Abu Layla. And just, if you can just make your way to the side over there, Layla Abu Layla will be signing copies of River Spirit. Thank you so much for coming. And Abu Dhabi International Book Fair continues. Assalamu alaikum.